in this presentation. What I'll do is I'll rattle through it, but if you've got any questions, just put them in the chat bit. Be as specific as you like. I've worked in comms now for nearly 25 years. So when I first started working in PR, there was no internet. That old, 104, a lot of makeup on today. Yeah, let's get cracking. And then yeah, anything at all, even if you think it's completely daft, don't be scared to ask, because you know, there will be somebody who will be like, yeah, what is it? I mean, my favorite thing about PR is I interviewed somebody once, and when we asked them what does PR stand for, they actually didn't know, even though they were in a job interview. And we did eventually give them a job because they came back for a second interview and had done loads of research. But anyway, so okay, let's crack on, and let me do a bit of an introduction on who I am. So I'm managing director of Padua Communications. We're a content marketing and PR agency based down in the New Forest, which is also pouring with rain today, I have to say. And basically, I run the business with my husband, who happens to be my business partner. So lockdown was really fun some days. And we basically set our business up so that we could do 50-50 childcare, because it was really important to us. We originally set up in Surrey, but we now have a sort of satellite office up there. And we basically have a team that we pull in, depending on the work that we're doing for clients. We work across mainly B2B space, though we have actually done quite a lot of consumer work as well. And we have kind of rogue clients that come in. Yeah, I'm at the moment doing some work with a local fabric shop, for instance. But at the same time, then we have, you know, businesses that work in data and additive manufacturing. And so in a way, that kind of whole idea of making a story, for me, it doesn't really matter what industry you're in. Or, you know, we've worked across hundreds. It's thinking creatively about where your customer is and what you want them to hear. Most of our work comes from referral, which is lovely. And yeah, I think we're pretty good at what we do. We've worked with over 150 businesses over the past decade, some big, some small. I think a lot of people think PR has to be really expensive, and traditionally a lot of the larger PR agencies would have had like a minimum spend and a minimum tie-in period. There's a sort of a reason for the time period, because PR, as I'll come on to in the slides, it's not just like an immediate thing that you can switch on, switch off. There is actually quite a lot of prep work that needs to be done beforehand, and kind of creating a story and stuff like that. But it doesn't have to be expensive. And I believe as long as you're thinking about who your customers are and where they're getting their information, you can always pretty much craft a story that you would be able to pitch out. So what is PR? Just in case you ever get asked in an interview. So public relations, PR, is an umbrella term, and it basically covers a whole host of activities and particular things that sometimes people think are marketing, sometimes people think are advertising, but PR in the broadest sense, if you like, is it kind of has lots of strings to its bow, if you like. The main thing that I suppose it's known for is when you think of it as media relations, so actually getting you coverage in publications, and that's what basically we're talking about today. So we're taking that sort of section, and part of that then has different devices that kind of make it. So a press release, which if you've never seen one, is basically a particular format that answers who, what, why, where, when and how, in a very succinct, crafted way to grab the attention of journalists. But also then there are other devices. So features are, if you have if you think of a printed publication, it's the longer story about midway through a publication, which might have 3 or 4 people mentioned in it. There's thought leadership articles, that tends to be sort of PR, although most people think they're actually marketing, but usually they're ghostwritten by journalists in a lot of cases. Opinion pieces are more a kind of, you know, you're taking it, so rather than it being a trends piece, it's your take on something. Case studies, again, a lot of people think it's a marketing, but actually case studies I think is part of a kind of PR role, because if you're doing a case study just for marketing, it tends to be very, very sort of soft and fluffy. You wouldn't be able to actually get a journalist interested in it. So a lot of these things here, I want you to sort of think about, actually, if you think of an old school printed publication, a printed magazine, everything in there that is not an advert which would be done by advertising, would basically be some sort of PR device that's in use. So we're talking today a little bit about dealing with the media, and I realise I haven't put my clock on, so I'm going to have to just make sure I whiz through so I don't, I'm not talking at 2 o'clock. But I wanted to just cover off particular things today. Some of those things about the kind of the how you work and the timings with working with the media, a little bit about kind of story and audiences, and a little bit about kind of getting things in order before you actually start doing any PR, of things that just will make your life easier. So let's start with what journalists want and the sort of stories that you might be able to come up with. So I always think when you're thinking about a story, you have to think about a person. Okay, personal stories are much more interesting than just it being a product or a service that you're doing. You need to find what the human element of the story is that you're creating. What journalists want is stories that their audiences will be interested in. So it doesn't matter whether it's a broadcast, or so a radio piece, or in a printed magazine, or on telly. That publication will have people that are loyal viewers or readers, and basically you need to sort of have any success with that publication, you need to have a story that readership or that viewing audience are going to be interested in. It's going to engage them. So you need to make sure that what you're pitching is relevant. There's quite a lot of people over the years that would do a kind of, I'm going to come up with this story and I'm going to just basically send it out and something's going to hit. But actually that doesn't really work. And actually you might get coverage, but it won't be in the places that you want it to be. And it also won't be relevant to your potential customers, which if you're thinking about the human element of it, really what you're thinking is, who are your target customers and who do you want to find out about something, and actually which publications do they read, because they will be the same people. That's who you're sort of aiming it for. The other thing as well that you need to think about is making sure that the information that you give to that journalist is going to fit with their medium. So there's no point in saying to a broadcast journalist, come and film us, if there's nothing to film, if there's nothing visually to see. That's just a waste of time. So you need to be thinking about the actual medium, the broadcast medium or the printed publication, and what actually will fit in it and make it as easy for that journalist to be able to take it and place it. Journalists also don't want to be sold to. So we always say with our clients that when you're talking about sort of spokespeople and who you want to talk to the press, don't ever put a salesperson forward, because a salesperson, just because they are a salesperson, will try and sell. And a journalist will probably know more about your industry than you do. And don't forget that they will have been speaking to your competitors and other people that are in, sort of in that space. So they kind of know the trends. They're usually quite a bit cleverer than the salesperson. So that's the biggest thing of, who you put forward. Don't put it to somebody who's just going to try and spin a yarn. That's a wrong sort of sales yarn rather than an actual proper story. They also work to specific deadlines. So making sure that you understand how a journalist works and the timings that they're working with, and getting them information, whether it's actually a finished thing that they've already bought into to say that they're going to print, or whether it's actually pitching in the idea, is absolutely key as well. And now as well, with publications, a lot of them being online, actually publications want exclusive content. So that whole idea of doing a press release and then sending it out and it all hitting and everybody writing the same thing is no longer really the case. You can do it for an announcement every once in a while, but it's not really the kind of main story that you would want to get loads of coverage for. So before you even start thinking about your story, one of the things I also think is take it back a step. Think about your customers and where they get their information. What publications do they read? Where do they get their news? Is it an online site? Is it a particular regional publication? Because your business is regional. So you need to basically build the target list. Sometimes that can be, 2, sometimes it can be 30, sometimes it can be 200 publications, depending on what you're trying to convey and actually who you're trying to actually get to understand that particular topic or kind of news story that you're sending out. If you're not sure about where your customers get their information, it's a really good exercise to go and ask them what things they listen to. You might find, for instance, that they don't read women's magazines, but they listen to Women's Hour religiously, you know, or they listen to Catch Up at the weekend. And that can really inform how and who you're going to pitch the stories that you want to get coverage for, so that it relates to the people that you actually would ultimately be selling to. And I also think it's quite key to be realistic about what you can achieve. Unless you have absolutely amazing stories or your Apple, you won't get coverage all of the time. Now, this is the thing about balancing the kind of effort for kind of PR stuff and the cost that it will be, and also what you get out of it. And also it's different, PR is different from advertising, the fact that if you bought an ad, you know, no matter what, it will run. Whereas actually you could have the best PR story in the world and actually the Queen could die. It's hopefully not, but you know, that all of a sudden would just change the news agenda. And what was, you know, even if you had coverage that it was going to hit on Thursday, happy days, it could all just, you know, go, and that's it. So there's sometimes a bit of a balance on what you're trying to say, whether PR is going to work for you, and how much effort you're going to be putting into it to get those returns. Having said that, if you've got a piece of coverage and you've got a trusted editor or journalist who said this person or this company is amazing, actually the kudos for that, from rather than placing your own ad, is much more. It outweighs everything else, because you've got like a trusted independent third-party endorsement for your service or your product. So let's talk about a little bit about the story. Now, I'd said about basically how trying to have a human element. If you've got a story and it's about people, that's always a win. If you've got a story and it's not about people, you need to think about what is the impact of the story so that there is a human element in it. It's going to be much more, a much better story if you've got kind of some personality, or a personality that you're talking about. So for example, saying that you've got a solution for menopause is one thing. Actually saying that, you know, sort of 3 women that you've worked with have had different symptoms from menopause, and you've worked with them and you've actually had, you know, sort of different results for them, is a much better story. It's a much stronger story. You've got, you know, sort of the customers in there who might say stuff about how nice it was to work with you and all the rest of it, how much better they feel. But that's much a stronger story to go to a journalist with than just this is what I do. So the other thing as well about it is that you can sometimes be very narrow. You know, if I sort of think about our business, we do PR, content, marketing and events. But actually, really, when we're talking about, you know, sort of those things, what we're thinking about is how stories have changed with, you know, sort of people getting information online now, or how much more information, how your information should be framed so that you can grab it in a snapshot, because people are basically, you know, married to their mobile phone and that's where they get their information. Or, you know, so you're basically having to do what I like is my Venn diagram of thinking of, okay, this is what I do, but what are the economic elements, the environmental elements, the social elements, the political elements. All of those things will flux what your news story is, and actually how it will make it broader, a broader appeal for you to be able to talk about it. So the example I've put here is, if you're a sustainability expert, that's one thing. You can say you're a sustainability expert. But if you all of a sudden say it's sustainability within the wider environmental context, and then actually you've got other things that you'll be able to talk about. You're not just saying one thing over and over. If you're talking about it from an economy, you might have it so that you can talk about sustainability and different changes in legislation, or when we leave Brexit, how that might affect. So you're giving yourself a bit of a wider scope for different things that you're going to be able to talk around and create stories with. And those two things, trying to actually get the kind of human element and also that kind of wider story, is what makes the best stories, and what makes journalists go, oh, actually, that's interesting. I didn't know that. You know, tell me a little bit more. I put a little bit about kind of what's realistic, and I just thought this is quite a good example of, just if you've never worked with media before, this is called a flat plan, and this is what particularly printed publications they would have, and that's what you'd be working for. You know, so here you've got the 2 covers where the crosses are. That's the front cover. The back cover, you're not going to get any coverage on that. But as you look through, you know, page 5, you can see Canon advert. You know, the last page before the last back cover is a Lacoste advert. So where the adverts are and where they're placed, they're also going to pay the money to put them there. So you're not going to be able to get coverage there. And then when you have a look at all the rest of it, you've got the kind of, okay, that would be a news story, or that would be a feature, or that's going to be a big image, but then there's going to be this much text at the bottom of the page. So you know that journalists have to be really, really strict on what stories they take and are kind of going to work with their publication. And having an understanding of that can really inform how you approach PR, which magazines or which publications you approach, and what kind of stories you pitch to them as well. So what makes a good story? Now, I thought this would probably be a good example. So these are 3 publications that we've done some PR with in the last 2 weeks. Okay, the first one, the top one, is the Telegraph. That's actually PR for us, for Patrick Communications. And basically, I'm waiting for it to appear, but I was interviewed by a journalist about homeschooling and running a business and homeschooling. So actually, it's got nothing to do with PR, content, marketing events, but actually it's managed to get me coverage on my business, which will say that it's doing those things and will, you know, sort of have reference to it, but talking about actually how we've managed that, and we've managed client expectations and the hours that we worked and the rest of it, the bigger picture. The one down here on the left, the Corona Eye, which is basically like an online site for professional services, I suppose, for like a sort of business things. We managed to get a piece of coverage in there for a client of ours that does data and analytics. And that, again, was a wider feature piece. They were talking about analytics and whether analytics are the new oil. So again, just, you know, their day-to-day stuff is not talking about oil at all, but actually taking that analogy of actually how businesses see data and how they use it, we created a story around it and actually sort of pitched it in. There is actually as well, just so you know, a link on our website for a blog post about how we pitched that feature into them and the steps that might be useful for you to check out after this, or when you're thinking about that as well. And then construction news down here. So this is for another client. And basically, we've got a piece that's running in November for them, which is a thought leadership piece about the UK construction industry and Brexit. Oh, the joy. We're having to start mentioning that word again. But so basically, they're an online website that help people who are moving house find local surveyors, electricians, plumbers, and stuff like that. But actually, they can see, because they've got this overview of all of those trades, how Brexit might affect certain things within a legislation point of view and a compliance point of view. And we managed to pitch in that story as a, look, we think this would be a good angle. So you can see they're all to do with a little bit about what you do or getting your company name out there, but actually they've kind of been flipped. You need to think, but each of them have got, you know, the construction news one was about actually how the UK construction industry or businesses within that would be affected. The Corona Eye one with the data is about how professional services would be affected by data. And ours was, the Telegraph one was about, you know, sort of how you balance a business and remote working and particular setup that we have as our business setup. But you can see how actually to get into those sorts of publications, you need to be able to shape and be fluid and agile enough to actually turn your story on its head for it. So I just want to talk a little bit about lead times. So media timings are quite different from how people imagine. When the amount of times that we've worked with businesses and they say, oh, I'm running an event in 2 weeks, I'd like some coverage in the local paper. And we're like, well, there's no point in talking to us now, because actually that's already gone. Depending on whether a publication is online or whether it's a monthly publication or whether it's radio, there's different timings that you need to work with. And I always think that PR people are always the best wedding planners as well, because we are used to just working backwards all of the time because of these sort of timings. So for example, if I was to pitch in a story for Christmas for a client of ours, actually I'd be pitching it in April, May time, because those particular publications that are doing their Christmas specials, they're already working on that 6 months ahead of time. A monthly publication, just to give you an idea, if it says, what we're in October now, if it was like a November publication, well, if you go and have a look into it in a news agents now, if you go to WHMS, all of the magazines will be December dates on there. So they're basically the December date that's printed way before that, so it's in the shop for the lead up to it. And it means that actually then if you're pitching stuff in, you need to be, sort of right the way back a couple of months to be able to pitch that story in. Now, particularly for things like news stories, sometimes that will be, a little bit later. If it's a feature, which is the longer story, they're usually written by, they're overseen by a features editor, but they're usually written by kind of freelancers or journalists that are doing stuff. And the research for that can be done kind of way in advance. So, for example, for a weekly publication, you'll be looking for a week for news, otherwise it's obviously old news, and 4 to 6 weeks for features. So you depending on the type of story that you're pitching, you need to have an awareness of when you need to talk to a particular journalist. And there's also other things, like I said about Christmas, but Valentine's Day, for example, if you're doing something that's going to tie in with that, you need to be talking to your journalist way before Christmas, because they'll already have the idea in the kind of what they're working on. So just, whenever you think I'm going to do that, just make sure that you give yourself enough time. And also, I would say as well, if you're particularly doing a story where there's personal elements in it, and you've got other people who are going to be spokespeople, you need to check that they are going to be available for when you need them, or when a journalist might need to speak to them as well. And sometimes they have no awareness at all. They think, oh yeah, well, the story's going to run on Tuesday, so I'll be around on the Monday. That's way too late. So just if you're trying to get your customers to get involved with you as well for doing stuff, and you think they're going to be up for doing some PR things, make sure that they're aware of, sort of the timings and when they can go on holiday and when they can't, and when you can put your foot down and say, no, I want you involved for this. So this is when we're going to need you. So in the toolkit that you're going to need for talking to journalists, sorry, I'm just trying to make sure that I can see the time on it. So Sian, just make sure if I start babbling on, okay. So in the toolkit that you're going to need, I've put like a list here, and I just thought it'd be quite good to sort of run through, just so you have an idea of what these things are, and what a PR professional would have for pitching in a story to a journalist. So the pitch is basically that idea of the story. It's you having done the research of actually who you're going to talk to, what kind of thing they might be interested in, if they've got particular interest in subject matters, and all that sort of prep work. You also need to have, as well as the kind of the actual outline of the story, bios and photography. So if you've got, for example, the piece that I talked about with the construction online, we already had a bio of the company, a little bit about them with links, and a bio on who the MD was and who the actual, and a head and shoulders shot of him, so that all of that is ready to go. So you're trying to make it as easy as possible for the journalist to be able to pick this stuff up. It already fits tone-wise with, sort of what he or she is writing and the publication that they're working for, and actually everything's easy for them. One of the reasons we're doing that is because when I first started working in PR, editorial teams were massive, and now they are absolutely, 1 or 2 people sometimes are doing everything. So you're trying to be as supportive as you can. The press release I mentioned earlier, so it has a particular format of, and it answers those questions. It's usually no longer than 2 sides of A4. It's got 1.5 line spacing, and it answers those questions. It's lots of people have sort of said, oh, it's the death of the press release and news doesn't work, but actually as a format and answering questions, it's a really, really useful tool to have, because if you are trying to put too much in, you lose it for actually how a journalist will actually scan what the story is about. There's also stuff on our website as well if you need some help about kind of what it actually looks like and what should be in there and stuff, but you're basically answering those sort of 6 questions within a fixed format. With that press release and with that information is a synopsis of the story, outline and key points. So sometimes you can almost take the first paragraph of what's in the press release, but also then in your email have the bullets of what the story is, what you've got to offer, really, really like a snapshot to grab and pique that journalist's interest that goes along with it. You might have kind of some notes on the key target journalists, so who you're going to pitch to. So I mentioned earlier about building that media list, but actually with your stories, be realistic. You know, how much coverage you're going to get, who's really going to be interested in running the story that you're trying to pitch in. And you might only have 4 or 5. So do your work, Google them, find out what kind of stuff really makes them interested. Try and have a conversation with them on Twitter. If they're on there, and you can sort of see their particular sort of topics and stuff that they would be interested in. But all of that means that you can then go and say to them, I've seen that you've shown an interest in this. This is why I think this story would be interested. Because a journalist who knows that you know what they're about, it makes it a much easier sell in. And just to give you a heads up, a journalist will be being pitched hundreds of stories a day, like literally hundreds. So you need to have something that's really quite special, not unique in a kind of because most things aren't unique, to be fair, but something that will actually be, you know, sort of quite different, or maybe a follow-up to something that they've already written something on. Spokespeople, so you need to have worked out who you are going to put forward in case the journalist says, I love this idea, who can I speak to? And it might be you, or it might be your customer, or it might be a partner. If you're in a larger organization, it might not be you, it might be another director. A really good example for this is if, for example, the piece is on International Women's Day, don't put a man forward, find the woman in your organization that you can put forward for being the spokesperson, but make sure that they have had some media coaching or some media training and they know what to expect. Because what you don't want is to completely cock up that opportunity. What you want is for them to be a go-to spokesperson, that when that journalist is writing a story about anything within that area, if you've got anything to offer, they think, oh, that person was really insightful. So put your best people forward. And if you think that they're not going to basically handle it very well, get some media training for them, just to make sure that they know what they're coming up against and they're prepared for it. And then crisis communications. Now I've put that on here because we all have obviously had crisis this year with being able to sort of deal with the pandemic, and it basically is the extra layer in the cake of being super prepped for what kind of story might be affected and how things might change. So just put some work in there. I mean, we're about to go possibly into a second lockdown again now, so have a think about, or if you're in the north, you're already in one, you know, what things do you need to have in your crisis kind of work bag that you can just pull out to make sure that your messaging is absolutely spot on. So some great just media friendly tips. When you're writing stuff, when you're pitching stuff, don't try and be too clever. Use simple words, make sure there's no typos in there, make sure your grammar is good. Don't try and confuse the story or try and give too much. You know, if it's a really good idea and you've got somebody who's going to, you know, absolutely blow a journalist's socks off, they'll come back to you. You might have to pitch them and badger them a little bit, but if it's a really good story, hopefully, fingers crossed, they would come back to you. Make sure you spell check your copy before sending it to a publication. Smaller teams means that there's less copy editing going on. And so basically what you want is your stuff to be lifted and just put in, ideally. If writing is a challenge and you hate it, if you were the person that hated English at school, don't do your writing, just get somebody to do it for you. It's not expensive. People think copywriters are expensive. They're really, really not. And think about breaking your media info into sections so it's easier to read. Don't think about it just being here's all the information. Make it so that you've got a synopsis, you've got kind of headers, you've got bullets, you've got kind of an FAQ, but so that actually it's really, really easy to digest and get the information out of it. When you're doing information for journalists, don't be too creative with headlines. That's their job. They have teams that they can come up with the headlines of the story. You just need to focus on the story and the audience. And then the journalist and the media outlet will have the people who will sort that and get it so that it fits their style. So just make sure that the prep work that you've done is spot on. You know, sometimes people can try and think, oh yeah, well, I'm going to make the headline so it's like, you know, a headline from the Sun. Actually, you don't need to do that. You just need to come up with a good story. That's it. Okay. Make it easy for journalists. So I've said this before, but don't send them things like PDFs, which, you know, just send them unbranded Word docs where they can copy information dead easy. Don't send them stuff that is under copyright that you don't have the copyright for. Don't send them images that, again, you don't have the copyright for. So you have to kind of think about those things, because actually the last thing you want is some kind of, you know, sort of lawsuit because of IP, and, you know, you just haven't got your ducks in order right up front. And remember that everything that you're doing is basically got one purpose. So when you're writing something, generally it's to get so that somebody will read the next sentence, read the sentence after that, read the sentence after that. But actually, when you're talking to a journalist, the same thing occurs. You can't just tell them one thing and expect that they'll understand it. You need to give them enough information to kind of get a grip of the story, but it needs to follow on. It needs to be logical. Right down to your kind of, you know, your call to action and what you want them to do. And lastly, just if you're not sure what your key messages are, or what you're wanting your story to be, speak to a PR person. It doesn't have to be expensive, as I said earlier. You know, sometimes it might be a kind of, you know, a couple of hours work, but just to actually sort of bounce some ideas around. But actually they will give you that's not a story, that's a sales pitch. Or no, that's been done to death. There's nothing particularly unique or different about why a journalist would, you know, sort of read that. Or no, you're going to go to a visual medium, and actually there's nothing there that's of interest to see. So just bounce some ideas around. Come and talk to us, come and ask us some stuff, or find somebody within your local area that, you know, you think would be able to help. And don't blow your chances. So I said about that, you know, making sure that the spokespeople you put forward are the right people, because the idea is that you want them to be a kind of constant go-to if you can, particularly if you're talking with a sort of trade publication or a niche publication. You want it so that that journalist will remember it's that person. So yeah, if you've got, it might be that you can sort of almost start pitching in those ideas, you know, sort of sooner than you think. So for example, I already know that I am going to be talking at an event in International Women's Day next year. That's actually been arranged for the last 2 months for something that I've done from pitching in earlier. So you're kind of constantly looking to make that relationship a longer term relationship. If you're really, really stuck on ideas and you're thinking, I don't know what publications I go to, surely I've got loads to say, but I don't know where. If you have a look at #JournoRequest on Twitter, there are journalists basically asking for stories on there all of the time under that hashtag. And it kind of sometimes can trigger off ideas of, hang on, what kind of thing can I be saying that might be a little bit different, or that might be able to sort of shoehorn my message into that particular publication. And just lastly to say as well, again, even if you've done all the work and you've got a journalist saying, happy days, I'm going to run this story and it's all good, there's no guarantees with PR. Something can happen in the news agenda, or that's sort of something that's going on in the world, and literally, you know, it's all up in the air. And part of that whole kind of working in news, features you have, there's a bit of flexibility, but particularly working in news, you're having to be flexible, and you're having to be really agile and kind of come up with stories all of the time, because you never know what's going to happen in the world that's going to change the agenda. And that's it from me. I know there's an awful lot in there, so if anybody's got any questions, I don't know if anybody's been typing stuff in, or if there's any particular burning issues that you kind of want me to cover, then by all means shout out now.
I think there was a question.
I was going to say, shall I do the stop share, and then actually you can. I'll do that. Hang on a second.
Thank you, Nikki. That really was absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I saw a question from Kelly pop up, which was, do you need to send a press release to get a feature? How do you go about approaching the media about this?
Okay, yeah. So press releases are really good for features because they answer those questions, but no, you don't have to. If you have a look, I'll see if I can find you the link while we're talking, and I'll put it in the chat bit for the how to get a feature thing as well. But features, so if you're working with a PR person all of the time, we have like a media database. So we're looking for opportunities for clients as part of the kind of ongoing work that we do. And it's kind of our business to try and see if we can spot them and push clients forward. And that's why for some businesses, working on that longer term campaign thing works, because you might be saying certain bits about news, but actually there might be other feature ops, particularly at the moment. So you're in kind of working with businesses from an HR point of view, for example. So there's like a whole host of things that are probably coming up about kind of the legal ramifications of furlough, getting teams back into the office, working remotely, how you're doing internal comms. I mean, there's like shed loads of stuff, because obviously this year has been this year. And actually a feature op, really, you are looking for those opportunities that you can react to them. So you're kind of thinking about what kind of stories, all of those things I've just said there, what angle would you take? But then actually what you can do is take one of them, and it might be that you've got, for example, a guide, or you're doing a webinar for people who've been made redundant, or something else that's part of your marketing armory, if you like, that you could then do PR around. So for example, you might do a webinar for people who've been made redundant in your particular regional area, but actually, or you might do a series of them. You might do then a press release about it, but then you might actually then speak to the features person on your news desk or in a particular business publication to say that we've done this and we've got some real tips. And you might take 3 of those tips that you out of the 10 that you're going to cover on the webinar and basically pull them together as a feature opportunity that you then pitch out.
Do you go to them before the event then? So for instance, I have last month ran some workshops for people to give them kind of CV guidance, interview prep, but that's happened in the past. Or in December, I've got a roundtable event coming up about neurodiversity in the workplace and kind of businesses that are looking to recruit at the moment with so many people being out of work, what adjustments they can make to get neurodiverse people back into work.
Yeah. So for instance, for that, I would do a press release saying, following on from the successful workshops, it's kind of referencing the fact that actually you know your stuff anyway, but you've got this workshop as a news piece anyway, and if people want to register or whatever. But then also with that, you know what you're going to cover off. You could also speak as a kind of feature opportunity. So you could almost be doing kind of a foot in both camps, depending on how much time you want to spend on PR. That's actually, sort of how much time you've got. The thing with a news piece and having dates in is it's done and dusted, whereas actually a feature opportunity tends to be a bit more like an evergreen content. So when we're doing kind of content creation generally for our clients, we're always trying to create evergreen stuff. So unless your business massively changes, actually, if you're doing a report or a findings report or something like that around that roundtable, you would actually be able to use it again and again and again for either a series of blogs or some thought leadership pieces. It would sort of fit in. But from a PR point of view, if you're just saying about that event, you've got the news bit and maybe a sort of follow-on stuff. Yeah. So the idea is to try and be clever with kind of what you've got so you get the most opportunities out of it.
And I think the question is then, do I go to the media and say, I want to talk on this subject? Or do I have to be a bit more strategic and go, right, here's a press release, and see if they pick it up and want to do a feature? Or do you know what I mean? Like, how does that relationship work? Because I've had press releases that have been picked up in the past, but nothing really more than that. Yeah. I mean, there's a local Facebook news thing for our area. And I sent them a press release and they did a video interview with me. Yeah. So that's sort of the closest I've got to something like that. But in terms of, I have a lot to say about kind of HR recruitment, the current way that the world that we're in. Yeah. How do I go about going, do you know what, actually, I am a thought leader. I can give you some really good up-to-date information. How do I go about approaching people to go, I've got something to say that's valuable to you that you can run with?
Yeah. So which publications are you trying to get coverage in?
Local ones, because I'm regional. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'd love to do something national, but I think that's a bit beyond me, yeah.
Really?
I think it just seems a bit scary. So I've only ever done like the local radios, local newspapers, and things like that, really. That's what I've tended to focus on.
So what I would say is, from a regional point of view, it's not, if you say basically you're sending out a press release, it, by the very nature of it, it's news, it answers those questions, that's that. It's like a teaser piece, if you like. Whereas if you then went to a one of those publications and said, look, we're running this event, but around it we're going to have 3 kind of opinion pieces, would you be interested in running them as kind of 3 bits or doing something, you may well find that they're like, actually, yeah, because, but you might have to back it up with how many people have been made redundant within the local area, some of the kind of like really, really hard statistics, so that they're like, actually, they can be seen to being helpful about it.
Yeah.
The other thing is as well that actually that whole thing, I mean, I always think with HR, and there's so many things that you could obviously say about, but you know, sort of it's being careful about actually kind of what campaign do you want to be known for, and creating kind of a series of bits of information that all kind of work together. There's absolutely no reason why you couldn't pitch your story, you know, to Women's Hour, for example, about women in that particular area, you know, finding that situation of going back to work and what they need to be aware of. That you know, but you need to make sure that actually you do have something then that's quite different, and that you're, you know, sometimes being controversial or being kind of the first person to put your head above the parapet to say this is a real issue here is actually a good thing with the PR world.
So look at making sure I've got the numbers to back up something that I want to say.
Yes. So if you're saying we're running this event because, you know, we think it'd be useful, that's one thing. If you put in your information, it's estimated that 3 million people are going to be made, you know, sort of unemployed in the next 6 months, and that we've got a massive skills crisis, and actually this is what people need to be aware of, then actually this is what we're doing this event for. You've got kind of an extra layer of people taking that kind of gravitas, and also seeing you as the expert in your space, which is basically what you're sort of pitching out. The other thing as well that you can do is you can do a kind of profile pitch on you. So like you would do if you were going to do sort of looking for speaker opportunities, you know, here's your photo, a bit of a bio, and here are your key topics. But you can do that with the media as well, but you could do it with you've written a piece and you do a synopsis of it. Would you be interested in something similar to, you know, sort of get your opinions on trends that people need to be aware of in recruitment next year, or how much a budget businesses need to be putting aside next year for kind of recruitment and retraining or upskilling. All of those things there, you would be able to be doing sort of PR stuff around. And it might only be that some things get little snippets, but actually then you might get a bang, you know, big piece.
So the bio thing, I would just send an email with a photo and a bio.
Yeah, I'll do it in a Word doc. So you've got a kind of, you know, here's about our company with links in, and here's, you know, me, separate image. And yeah, these are the things that you're talking about. And but if you've got something you've already written, or something that is actually kind of quite out there, something you might have put on LinkedIn or something like that, then you can basically do a kind of like a pitch out of a soundbite and would you be interested in other things or being involved with, and then see how it goes from there.
Good idea.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any others?
Christina, did you have any questions, or Morag, any questions at all? No pressure. No? Oh, Christina.
No, I didn't. I think what Kelly asked right now, just at the end, that you can take something that you've already written and see, like, because I've got my own website for the company, for the coaching company, and I just have a blog. So I've got a blog on the website. So I just tend to post there. So would that be an option to just take a snippet out of that?
Yeah, it can be, but you need to be. So if you're thinking about it from a journalist point of view, they get stacks of information sent to them. It needs to be something that's sort of quite different. So yours in pharmacy, but coaching for people who are in pharmacy.
That's in the healthcare industry.
In the healthcare industry.
Yeah.
So again, your story, I would say, is how people are managing stress at the moment, how they're actually sort of dealing, what kind of the real trends that you're seeing, what are the main issues. You might have to kind of come up with some doom and gloom statistics, you know, how many people are actually committing suicide, or as we're running up to Christmas, what are the big kind of issues? And actually how you, it's not necessarily how you can help, that's too salesy, but it's kind of a, just, if you're thinking about it as a kind of an awareness and an education about it, that kind of thing. So if you're sort of saying, you know, it's just sort of run of the mill, this is my kind of blog and help piece, that's probably not going to do it. You need to kind of still pique their interest a little bit. Okay. I was going to say, I'm just going to put in the chat the link to the feature bit on our blog. So you can, that's actually kind of a, you know, the step-by-step of how I kind of got our client in Chrono Eye as a feature. And if you have a look at the website as well, I'll just look and see if I can see it, and then I'm going to.
I'll make sure I share all your contact details and these links as well, Nicky.
Okay, yeah, cool.
That's great.
If you, business partner has taken off the search bit on our blog, but which is not particularly helpful. But if you have a look at, if you two maybe press releases, Padua Communications in Google, you will probably find a link. Let me just see if I can find it. There are, right. Another one in about how journalists read press releases as well, just to give you an idea. So yeah, so hopefully there's some stuff there that, you know, you'll be able to help. But just by all means, if you've got questions or you just want to bounce some ideas or whatever, then, you know, just ping me an email. I'm more than happy to help.
Just have a quick question on how would you work with a copywriter? What kind of relationship would that be if I were to look to get a copywriter? Would they write the whole blog for me, or would I give them the idea and they would write the blog, the article for me, or how? I'm not sure how it would work.
Okay, it depends really. For us, for the content that we write for clients, we do quite a lot of content planning as part of the work that we do. And we've got clients that literally come up with the ideas for the first 2 months, and then for the next 4 years they don't come up with an original idea. We do all of their content ideas. Actually, I think because our team of journalists as well, whenever we're trying to kind of think about what would make a good story, we think about it from that point of view rather than it just being a straight marketing angle. For some copywriters, you can give them the idea and then go off and write. If they've got particular expertise in writing in an industry, then that's sometimes quite a good thing. For us, our big thing, I suppose, that makes us a bit different from a lot of other copywriters is we would interview you as almost like a journalist and get the story, and then basically we'd come up with kind of these are the angles that we think you should take. So it's a little bit different than just a copywriter writing some copy and having a look on your website. But again, it depends on what you're saying. For some subject matter, you know, a copywriter can write it. Our particular, I suppose, expertise as Padua is that we, apart from the fact that we have all been journalists, we also have worked in a very, very technical space. So we're very good at kind of taking what sometimes is very dry, jargon-filled information and writing around that, whereas a lot of people actually would just be, you know, asleep by the time that they started looking at it. If you're writing something that's a bit more of a kind of business angle, there's obviously more kind of copywriters out there to do stuff. But yeah, so you can, there's different things. You can either give them some information and see how they go, or I would say if you can get them to interview you, if, you know, if they don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for answering that.
Pleasure.
Nicky, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate your time, your expertise and your support.
Pleasure.
It's been brilliant. There is a lot in there. What I will do is make sure I share the recording with everybody and links as Nicky shared and your contact details as well.
Yeah,
Nicky,
please do. Yeah, and if you've got any questions at all or anything, as soon as this closes, you know, it's like, you're like, oh, damn it, I should have asked that bit. Then, you know, sort of have a think. One of the things I might do at some point, Sean, as well, is do a kind of, you know, images and things that you need to be aware of for the press as well, because sometimes, you know, people's idea of a kind of corporate headshot is just way off. What, you know, sometimes you look on LinkedIn and it's, you know, somebody in a bikini and, you know, or sat with a drink, and you're like, no, it's actually, that's not really the done thing. The journalists, it's a similar thing. So sometimes it's kind of, you know, making sure that you've got something that will help sell in that story as well.
Yeah, that's a good idea, actually. I've seen some classics on LinkedIn.
I know, me too. And I'm thinking LinkedIn is a professional one. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's always difficult as well when you have to actually say to your client, and they're like, you know, I had one who was a president, because it was a French company, he was president of the UK arm of a massive company, and his LinkedIn profile was him with some black sunglasses on, lying drinking a cocktail with basically just his Speedos on, and I was like, oh my God, like,
Wow.
my goggles.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, on that note, and with that image, thank you all so much for your time. Stay safe and well, and yeah, do keep in contact if there's anything that we or Nicky can do to support you.
Yeah, thank you.
Lovely. Thank you all so much. Take care.
Have a good afternoon.
Bye.
Bye.
You too. Bye.